When it comes to fighting Ebola, time is of the essence. A top U.S. official elaborates. Nigeria is Ebola-free, and medical experts around the world are studying the country's response to the virus. And a South African dance company brings its fusion style to New York. Africa 54 starts right now.
Hello and welcome. I'm Vincent McCorry. This is Africa 54. The new head of the U.S. State Department's Ebola unit says there has been a good international response to appeals from President Barack Obama's administration to pledge more aid to West Africa. But Ambassador Nancy Powell says the affected region still lacks medical facilities, trained medical staff, and proper equipment. VOA State Department correspondent Pam Dawkins has the story.
Medical workers like these in Liberia have struggled to keep up with the demands brought on by the region's growing number of Ebola cases. Although more international relief is flowing into West Africa, it falls short of what's needed, according to Robbie Torbay, who is with one of the international medical relief groups working in the region.
The international community is behind the curve in terms of their response. Nobody anticipated that the outbreak will be this large in both Sierra Leone and Liberia, as well as in Guinea. And we're all trying to play catch up.
A growing number of countries are stepping up to answer the United Nations call for $1 billion in assistance to fight Ebola. But one of the biggest challenges to helping victims in West Africa is time, says U.S. Ambassador Nancy Powell.
I think it's the more and faster piece of getting the response to be very, very robust and getting it delivered fast. And recognizing that at the same time, you're dealing with a disease that is very deadly. So you can't skip steps.
Powell says while there has been a good response to U.S. appeals for assistance, the time factor could continue to drive up mortality rates in West Africa.
For each week that we don't achieve 70% of the cases being treated in areas where there's isolation of the patients, and we don't have 70% of the bodies recovered within 24 hours in a safe way. There's an estimate that there may be as many as 7,500 new cases per week for each of the delays in not reaching those targets.
Powell says it is estimates like this that have been driving U.S. officials to find ways to help resolve West Africa's Ebola crisis. Pam Dawkins, VOA News, the State Department.
Well, the Red Cross chief says the Ebola outbreak that has killed more than 4,500 people in West Africa could be contained within 4 to 6 months if the right steps are followed. Elhaj Asai told reporters Wednesday in China the time frame is possible with good isolation and treatment for those with confirmed cases of Ebola, along with proper burials for those who died from the virus. Sai also insisted that imposing a travel ban on people from the hardest hit African countries will not effectively curb the outbreak.
So it creates a lot of fear and extreme panic that sometimes, lead to very irrational, type of behaviors and measures, like closing borders, cancelling flights, isolating countries, etc. And those are no solutions. The only solution is how can we join our efforts to contain, those kind of viruses and epidemic at their epicenter, right where it starts, to contain it there.
Well, meanwhile, the World Health Organization is convening a meeting of its Emergency Committee on Ebola to discuss the latest developments in the outbreak and whether to alter its recommendations. While tens of thousands of people in West Africa are expected to begin receiving experimental Ebola vaccines in January, but mass immunizations is still far off. The WHO says the clinical trials of the GlaxoSmithKline and New Link Genetics vaccines are underway, with 500 volunteers set to participate in the U.S., Britain, Germany, Switzerland, Mali, Gabon, and Kenya. Dr. Mary Pauli Kane, WHO Assistant Director General for Health Systems and Innovations, says the test will generate data on safety and protection in December before the vaccines can be rolled out early next year.
There is still a possibility that will fail, but everybody is putting things in order for being able to move to West Africa in January. So this will most likely be in the form of efficacy trials, but in order to have a response as quickly as possible, these trials will need to be quite large and enroll quite quickly.
While the GSK and the new Link vaccines are considered lead candidates, there are also other vaccines being developed. Well, the WHO has declared Nigeria Ebola-free, crediting its rapid response with halting the spread of the disease in Africa's most populous country. VOA's Jeff Swycott tells us what the Nigerian medical community did to beat a disease that is devastating Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone.
Medical experts from around the world are studying the success of the Nigerian response to see what they can learn. Nancy Knight with the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is working with the Nigerian Emergency Operations Center in Lagos.
Nigeria's response in terms of the difference from other countries had to do with the speed at which they began their response by identifying the imported case and the establishment, the utilization of the incident management system with the establishment of an emergency operations center.
On July 20th, a Liberian American en route from Monrovia collapsed inside the international airport in Lagos. 3 days later, Nigeria's first or index case of Ebola was confirmed. Dr. Faisal Schwab is the incident manager at the Nigerian Emergency Operations Center.
So even ahead of the detection of a case, we already had capacity building going on in the states. We already had trainings and pre-position of supplies.
Health experts say the spread of Ebola to Lagos, a densely populated city of 18 million, was a potential catastrophe. Nigerian officials quickly sent out investigators to identify and isolate all contacts with the index case. The list of potential exposures grew to more than 800.
One thing that could easily have led to a worse scenario was if the contacts or if cases were in the communities and spreading the disease. But this was not the case in Nigeria because we were followed up the contacts as aggressively as possible.
Fever is one of the first symptoms of Ebola. Here at Murtala Muhammad International Airport in Lagos, travelers must fill out health forms declaring any contact with Ebola victims and have their temperature taken. Dr. Alex Ako is director of Port Health in Lagos.
Thank you. For passengers who have symptoms suggestive of Ebola or who have a temperature above 38 degrees, they don't get to check in.
Community outreach is another critical part of incident management. These volunteers have visited 26,000 households, educating the public about how the virus is spread. Outreach worker Samson Amateo.
Being African, some people think Ebola is a kind of a curse, and some take Ebola to be a spiritual infection, but we were able to make them know that this thing is real.
Nigerian officials say they will continue screening passengers at ports of entry as long as Ebola is present in neighboring countries, where there is currently no end in sight to the crisis. Jeff Swycott, VOA News, Lagos.
Well, there's no known cure for Ebola, but several U.S. patients have received donations of blood and plasma from a survivor of the Ebola virus. VOA's Catherine Gibson looks at whether the blood of Ebola survivors has value in the medical community.
Today is a miraculous day.
Dr. Kent Brantley survived Ebola. One possible cause for his recovery? A blood transfusion from a young Ebola survivor in Africa. Blood transfusions are an experimental treatment for Ebola. Survivors may have high levels of antibodies in their blood that can help fight the Ebola virus in new patients. Dr. Brantley has donated blood or plasma to 3 U.S. Ebola patients. He was not able to donate to Thomas Duncan, the Liberian who died of the virus at Dallas Hospital, because they did not share the same blood type. Blood transfusions share some similarities with vaccines now in development that use artificial antibodies similar to the ones found in survivor blood. Dr. Jesse Goodman, a professor of medicine and infectious diseases at Georgetown University Medical Center, says the medical community still needs more research on the effectiveness of the transfusions.
I do think it's important to realize we don't know whether transfusion of blood from somebody who's recovered from the disease actually helps. We just don't know. So the fact that some individuals who received the blood got better doesn't necessarily mean that it's the blood that did it.
Dr. Goodman says that the transfusions may be only one element in the treatment of Ebola survivors. Prompt medical attention and the overall health of the patient are also factors in recovery from the virus. The transfusion treatment will need to undergo rigorous testing to determine if it makes a difference. But even if Dr. Brantley's blood does turn out to be a key part of treatment, Georgetown University professor Lawrence Gostin says his blood, and the blood of all Ebola survivors, belongs to everyone. He spoke via Skype.
We are all part of the human race. And as part of the human race, it means we shouldn't be selfish. We should be community-minded and community-spirited. There should be no patents on it. There should be no financial gain. There should be no hesitation. The ethical and the right thing to do is so clear to anyone.
It is a question that is sure to come up again on the long road to discovering effective treatments for Ebola. Catherine Gibson, VOA News.
Well, a Congolese gynecologist who has spent more than 15 years helping women heal from the horrors of rape has won this year's Zakharov Human Rights Prize. The European Parliament unanimously chose Dr. Denis Mukwege for what it calls his fight for the protection of women. The 59-year-old Mukwege founded his hospital in the Democratic Republic of Congo in 1998 to treat victims of war-inspired mass rape and sexual violence. He survived an assassination attempt and defied death threats for speaking out against rape as a weapon of war. Dr. Mukwege will be awarded the prize on November 26 in France. The Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought was named for the late Soviet dissident and scientist Andrei Sakharov. Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Well, coming up, the U.S. and Iran tackle the challenges of fighting the Islamic State. Stay with us.
I think that Straight Talk Africa is important to the viewers precisely because they see it like a mirror. They see themselves in the discussions that are carried out on Straight Talk Africa.
Tune in to Straight Talk Africa each week on TV, radio, and internet. Join in the discussion of the issues affecting you.
Welcome back. The United States and Iran are both helping fight Sunni militants in the Islamic State group. But one of the biggest battlefields is Syria, where Washington and Tehran back opposing sides in the civil war. VOA State Department correspondent Scott Stearns reports on how that's affecting the fight.
The United States and Iran are both backing Kurdish fighters in Iraq who've retaken some ground near the Syrian border, with help from coalition airstrikes against Islamic State fighters who are also known as Daesh. Meeting with Arab allies, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said there's broad support for the fight.
Every country in the region is opposed to Daesh, without exception. And whether it's Iran or Lebanon or Syria itself or Turkey or Iraq, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, they're all opposed.
But in Syria itself, it's less clear whom best to back against the Islamic State.
Iran faces a very difficult calculation about exactly what its interests are, just as the United States does.
Georgetown University professor Nora Ben-Sahel says Washington and Tehran are both sorting through a broad mix of on-the-ground forces.
The problem is that in Syria, everything is so interconnected that it's not as simple as the enemy of my enemy is my friend. The enemy of my enemy might still be my enemy on a whole lot of other things.
The Obama administration is determined to keep its contacts with Tehran focused on rolling back its nuclear program. But there have been direct talks on Syria and the Islamic State. Iranian National Security Council Director Ali Shamkhani says Tehran stands steadfast against more direct foreign intervention.
There will not be an intention of a ground intervention because they failed in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we oppose any foreign intervention in the region by these states.
Tehran will not allow the fight against the Islamic State to weaken Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, says American University professor Akbar Ahmed.
Iran has a very aggressive foreign policy. It's not going to just allow events to take place without having a say in them or attempting a say in them.
U.S. officials say one area of agreement with Iran is the fight for Kobani, where there are no Syrian government forces, and both Washington and Tehran support the Kurdish opposition. Scott Stearns, VOA News at the State Department.
East African leaders met with South Sudanese President Salva Kiir on Wednesday, the latest push to end over 10 months of civil war. Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta, Ethiopian Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn, and Ugandan Prime Minister Ruhakana Rugunda visited Juba to discuss the ongoing peace process. President Kiir and his rival former Vice President Riek Machar have accepted mutual responsibility for the war. Now, for more perspective, we welcome Majak Da Agot, former South Sudanese Defense Minister, to Africa 54. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, now first, I just want to confirm, you actually were one of those 4 who were accused initially of having engineered the attempted coup in South Sudan.
Well, I was picked up on trumped-up charges by the government and accused of being part of a group that attempted a coup d'etat. We were taken through a botched court process, and the evidence has shown that the government didn't have a case, and that's why we were set free.
Yeah. Now, you were part of the government, and what is going on now is a conflict between former members of the government and the government of Juba. What has stalled these talks? 10 months down the line, there's no agreement.
Well, in the first place, the regional body, IGAD, and the African Union and the international community responded promptly when this crisis broke out, and that has helped in saving many lives. The deployment of armies helped many people that you see now in protection camps in South Sudan is still alive. Otherwise, they would have been victims of mass slaughter. However, much as that has been achieved, the talks have stalled. Cessation of hostilities agreement has been signed, but this is not being respected by the parties. A comprehensive peace settlement has not yet been achieved. This is because the leaders of the warring parties have not demonstrated a strong will to give the process impetus and take it.
And that's a critical point. It shows both sides have not demonstrated that will. But it's good to see that the leaders on Monday said they take full responsibility for what has happened. What is it they're not agreeing on?
Well, it is more about leadership architecture at the top. The IGAD heads of states in August came out with a protocol to define what should be the leadership architecture of the transitional period. That leadership architecture that the heads of states summit generated has actually caused its own choke points. And it is these choke points, these roadblocks that must be carefully negotiated. And in my view, I think there is a need to re-engineer the process in a manner that creates a bypass around these choke points.
Yeah. Now, some have actually said the best way forward once there is some peace, is to get a government that excludes both of the current leaders. Is that tenable?
Well, that would be the best state of nature. But where are you starting from? You're starting from a conflict situation, and a conflict situation would require that the warring parties participate and actually play a critical role in pushing forward the implementation of the peace agreement. So excluding them will be a very difficult thing.
Now, as a person who has been part of the system and also now kind of standing a little aside, do you see both sides of the leadership agonizing over the killings, the rapes and the suffering of many of South Sudanese citizens?
It is squarely responsibility of the SPLM party. The SPLM party, after the death of John Garang, has been a well-oiled machine. It has generated frictions in its operation, and that has caused this conflict. Furthermore, it is squarely falling on the President of the Republic of South Sudan as the chief executive officer of this corporate body called SPLM.
Yeah, but of course the opposition takes responsibility
of course,
have to do something about the killings of innocent people. Anyway, thanks a lot, Mr. Dagot, for joining us today. Oh, well, Majak Dagot is the former South Sudanese defense minister. Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. An Oscar-winning actress's new looks sparks a firestorm on social media. We'll be right back.
If you've just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines. The Libyan government calls for a civil disobedience campaign against anti-government militants in the capital, Tripoli. In Sudan, UN Refugee Agency Commissioner Antonio Guterres calls for assistance with thousands of refugees from South Sudan. And the World Food Programme begins distributing food and supplies to Ebola-ravaged Liberia and Sierra Leone. In Sudan, President Omar al-Bashir announces he will run for re-election in 2015. Finally, in Ivory Coast, flights resume to and from Guinea, which were previously restricted due to the threat of the Ebola outbreak. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. An Oscar-winning actress's new look has people talking on social media. Renee Zellweger made a rare red carpet appearance at the Elle magazine Women in Hollywood Awards, causing a media storm over what some are saying an altered appearance. The Academy Award winner posed for photos on the carpet. Zellweger hasn't starred in a movie since 2010 and has shied away from the spotlight for the most part. Zellweger was one of the Hollywood's most sought-after actresses in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Well, next up, are you looking for something to make you feel like a virgin? Well, costumes, gowns, and jewelry worn by Madonna in films such as Evita and A League of Their Own, and in the Material Girl music video will be the highlights of the Icons and Idols auction next month in Beverly Hills. They are among the more than 140 items from Madonna's life and career that could fetch up to $500,000 in the two-day in-house and online auction beginning November the 7th. Madonna was named the highest-earning celebrity in 2013 by Forbes magazine. And finally, Prince Harry turns rugby coach as he enters a school scrum. Harry joined in a game with dozens of youngsters at a mini rugby festival in northwest England. Harry took part in a trainee session for new rugby coaches, while Prince Harry is patron of England's Rugby All Schools program, a project launched to increase the number of children playing the sport in schools. And that is what is trending today. Now, a festival of South African arts in New York, Ubuntu features a dance company from Johannesburg. The Vuyani Dance Theatre recently performed at New York City Center, where VOA's Caroline Weaver met up with them.
South Africa's Vuyani Dance Theatre in rehearsal at New York City Center. They're getting ready for an evening performance of a recent work, their first in the United States. Artistic director and choreographer Luanda Sidia.
I'm a bit scared. We have performed in Europe, the work before, but then this is a different audience, it's a different continent.
The work they've been invited to perform is called Umnakelo, created by Sidia for 8 dancers and several musicians, singing, drumming, and playing the violin. Sidia says the work is about making an offering.
It's basically giving thanks. It's appreciating what you have as an individual and offering yourself to the moment that you live in, what you have, the talent that you have, and giving thanks to the deity form, the most high power.
The company is often described as blending African rhythms and dance with Western modern dance. But Sidia points out that there is no African dance. There are hundreds.
When you say African dance, which one is African dance? From Egypt, from South Africa, from Zimbabwe? There's different tribes, there's different cultures within Africa. And at the same time, I cannot be boxed as an African choreographer. I'm a choreographer that does work globally. Hence the work, it's a fusion of different elements.
He says the company includes men and women from 6 or 7 different tribes, and Umnakelo comments on this.
How do they live in harmony, and how do they find the commonality and the ground that would say, this is what we are special in, this is what we can do as different cultures, different tribes.
Video of a previous performance, City Center allows only rehearsals to be taped, shows the dancers whirling in glimmering unisex costumes that look at once classical and futuristic. And Sidia's nerves notwithstanding, Vuyani's 2 performances were enthusiastically received by New York audiences. Carolyn Weaver, VOA News, New York.
Beautiful. Well, that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com for more news. Tune in to today's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa. That's between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. From all of us here in Washington, have a good night.
Welcome to Voice of America's News Words, where we teach you about words in the news.
When the George W. Bush Presidential Library opened in Texas, all of the living U.S. presidents, past and present, gathered for the ceremony.
One of the things that the Presidential Library's opening demonstrates in many ways is an end to the administration. This is really the last thing that he's going to do as president of this administration, of this group of people.
The word presidential means having to do with a president. Presidential libraries hold the official papers from a president's administration.
Presidential elections are when voters choose a president, often a nation's top public official. Now, when you hear the word presidential,
your English will be good enough to know what this news word means.